All right, so if you're just coming in, we are starting our new unit, Unit 3, which has to do with Boolean expressions and if statements. So if this is, okay, thank you. So if this is not your first programming class, this will be more familiar territory. So using objects probably was new to you if you took AP, CSP, and had some previous programming experience, but the if statements and Boolean expressions should not be new to you, and so this might give you a chance to kind of relax in familiar territory. So let's go ahead and start off with just going over what we call the comparison or relational operators. So let's see, I've got this Jamboard here. So relational operators should be pretty familiar to you from math class, but they might look a little bit different, right? So if we're trying to measure equivalence between, say, two numbers, we can do that with these, what's the double equal sign. So a common mistake is to accidentally, try to see if, let's say x is, we have an integer called x called, or that refers to the number 5, and then we have an int named y that refers to the number 4. A common mistake that beginning programmers make when they're trying to see if two numbers are equal is they'll say x equals y to compare. And that doesn't check for an equivalence. That actually sets x equal to the value of y. So to check for equivalence, you want to say x double equals y. And in this case, what would the Boolean value result be if I said x double equals y? Would this be true or false, given these two lines above? It would be false, right? This would evaluate to false. False. Let's see if I can fit that in there. So one of the key things to know here is when you are comparing two things with relational operators, the result is always going to be a Boolean. So result will always be Boolean, so true or false. All right. And so this will come in handy when we start using if statements. If we want to do one thing, if one thing is true, and then do another if it's false. That'll be very handy. So let me put true, false here. And then we've also got one for not equals that you may not recognize if this is your first programming class. So not equals basically has an exclamation mark that stands for not, and then the equal symbol. So that's not equals. So anytime you see an exclamation mark, that means not. And then the next two will look familiar from math class. You got the less than, and then you've got the greater than. And then the next two kind of look familiar. You've got less than or equal. That usually looks like this in math class, but we can't put the symbol in our code. So we just put the less than and then the equal symbol next to it. And then the next one, same thing. This would be the normal greater than or equal to symbol in math class, but then we just, for Java, we put greater than and then the equal sign there. All right, and yes, again, when we use these relational operators in a statement, it's always going to be evaluated to either a true or a false, a Boolean value. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. We're not going to get to if statements in this particular lesson, but that's where we're headed. Right now, we're just going to worry about the evaluation of statements that have relational operators. So let's go switch over to, let me clear my screen. Let's switch over to our first example here. So this first example is going to be code that determines whether or not you are old enough to vote. And let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look at this code and see what's going on. So they've made it interactive with a scanner, right? So that they can use user input. And they want to get from the user their age. So they prompt the user for their age and then store it in this variable here called age. And then here's the part that we're actually interested in. Here's the part that's new. This is the part that checks if the age is greater than or equal to the legal age to vote, which is 18. So they've declared this variable old enough to vote, and they've made it equal to the evaluation of this Boolean statement, right? This is a Boolean statement that checks to see if age, whatever that is, whatever the person submitted, is greater than or equal to 18. So, for instance, let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so let's say that, well, let's go ahead and do my age. I just turned 37. It was my birthday right before the election, right after Halloween. So I'm going to put my age. And is 37 greater than or equal to 18? True or false? Is 37 greater than or equal to 18? True or false? True. Okay. So this variable old enough to vote is going to be true. And then it's going to go ahead and print old enough to vote in the US, and then it's going to go ahead and put the Boolean value here, true. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that. And there you have it right there. Let's try a number for which this would not be true. So go ahead and give me an age that will result in false. You can put it in the chat. Okay, yeah, we could do 17. So old enough to vote in the US, false. And actually in California, we just voted to make it legal. Well, we tried to approve making it legal for 17-year-olds to vote as long as they'd be 18, like close enough to the election or something like that, but it did not pass. I thought it made sense. All right, so I think this one, is there any questions on this one? So this one was just kind of seeing what different values would result in false and what would result in true. What if I put 18 here? What would the result be if I put 18? It would be true, right? Because it is greater than or equal to, greater or equal to. So it's going to be true. Yeah, good. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Let's continue. All right, for this one, we've got grade range. So you'll be very familiar with this one with progress reports just coming out. So in this one, we want to check whether or not a person, a student got an A, okay? So for this one, we want to basically input it looks like they want you to put in a percentage, but like a whole number percentage. So like 90 or 80 or 70, 75, whatever. And then what it'll do is it'll check if your grade is greater than or equal to 90, which is the cutoff for an A. And it'll print out, once again, true or false, depending on what your grade was. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this one. Okay, so let's say that, I got a 72. is it going to be true or false that I got an A? False, right? Because 782 is a not greater than or equal to 90. So that statement's going to be false. So we're going to got an A, false. All right, give me a number that will result in a true. So give me a grade value. Okay, 93. So 93 is greater than or equal to 90, so that's going to result in a true. And then one final one, what if I put 90? Is that going to be true or false? That's going to be true because we have greater than or equal to. Good. All right. So that one's very similar. Let's go ahead and go to the next example. All right. So for this one, we are looking at something a little different. So the equality of strings. Okay. So let's open this guy up. Wow, there's a lot of comments here. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about before we look at this example is that if we look at this guy, right, we've got this comparison operator that checks for the equality of two values, right? So a lot of times, beginning programmers will try to check the equivalence of two objects like strings, right? And try to compare two strings to see if they are equal using the double equals right here. But that is a common mistake. That's something that you usually do not want to do. And let me tell you why. So if you're using this guy to compare objects like two strings, let's see, compare objects, it actually checks to see, it doesn't check to see if the values are the same, because that's usually what you're trying to do. You're trying to say, hey, does the string hello match this other string hello? That's usually what you're wanting to check. But that's not what double equals does. Double equals checks to see if the two objects are the same object, meaning like this string would equal itself, right? It's the same place in memory. That's what it's checking for. Is it the same object in memory? But if you want to check to see if two different strings have the same value, are equivalent to one another, you have to use the special method equals. Okay, so like say this string A, let's say that this is string A, and then this is string B. What you really want to do is say, A, do you equal B? That's what you actually want to put. You do not want to say, A, do you equal B like that, because that's not what that's asking. Okay, it's not asking if the values are equivalent, it's asking if it's the same object in memory, and that's usually not what you want to do. Especially like on the AP test, they're usually going to want you to use equals because they're never going to ask you, hey, are these two strings the same object in memory? They're going to ask you, hey, do these two strings have the same value? Okay, so just be aware of that. Whenever you're looking for equivalence among objects, you're using this method equals. Whenever you're checking for equivalence in numeric values like integers or doubles, you use this double equal sign. And so that's what this example is going to also illustrate. So let's look at this. It's called the equality of strings. So let me go ahead and clear this. Okay, so we've got this first string literal called test. Okay, And then we've got another string literal called test. Okay, so in this case, when you create strings in this way, if you have a string in memory that has a value already, right? So you've created a string here called literal with the value test. And then you're trying to create another string literal called another literal that also has the value test. If you don't explicitly say I want a new string like this, if you don't explicitly say that and it notices that you already have a string with the same value, it's actually going to point to the same object. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here on this line, we're creating a reference in memory called literal, and that is pointing to the string that's getting created, test. And then here on line 16, it says, hey, I want to create a string called test. One already exists with the same exact value, and Java wanting to save memory says, well, I'm not going to create another one. I'm just going to create another reference variable. I'm going to create this other reference variable called another literal. That's what it's called right here. And then I'm going to point to the existing string in memory, another literal. So I'm just going to point to that. So in this case, if I try to compare these two strings with double equals, the result is going to be true because they're pointing to the same object in memory. If I try to compare these two with the equals method, the result is going to be true because the value is the same. Both of them have test as the value. So let's go ahead and run this, and we're going to see that the first two things that get printed out is that they are true. That if we compare the two string objects with the double equals, it's going to be true. And if we compare the two string objects with the equals method, it's also going to be true. So let's go ahead and just run that guy to illustrate that. Okay, so you can see that the first two are true. And again, that's because if we compare with double equals, we're asking, is it the same object in memory? And in this case, they are. Okay, and then if we compare with the equals method, it's asking, do these objects have the same value? And both of them have the same value of test, so that's true. Okay, and that's because we did not explicitly call the constructor to create a new string here on line 16. Java saw that, hey, we already have an object in memory with the exact same value, so I'm not going to bother creating a new string object. I'm just going to point to that existing one in memory. So now the next example they're going to show you is how you can actually explicitly create a new string object, and that is by calling the constructor. So you'll see here on line 27, they create this object explicitly using the constructor. So this is going to construct a whole new string object, even though it has the same value as these two here. So when we call line 27, what that does is we're creating a new reference called str object string object. And that points to a brand new string with the value of test. Let's go ahead and point down here. So now if we were to compare str object using the double equal sign to literal, again, this is asking, hey, does this object point to the same spot in memory as literal? And what do you think? Does this point to the same place as literal does? True or false? So just follow the arrows. You can also say I don't know if you're not sure. So does string object point to the same thing as literal? So literal points over here, string object points over here. True or false? Do they point to the same object? False, yes, exactly. They are pointing to two different objects. So when we're comparing with this double equal symbol, what it's asking is it pointing to the same place in memory? And that's why we usually don't want to use this double equals. So this first comparison here on line 31, using the double equal symbol, it's asking if literal points to the same memory, that's what these two equal symbols mean, as string object. And as Kay said, it's going to be false, right? They point to two different objects in memory. But if we try to compare the two using the equal symbol, like on line 34, that's asking, do these two objects, string object and literal, have the same value? And we can see that string object points to test and literal points to another string that has the same exact value of test. So the dot equals method is going to evaluate to true. And that's why we usually want to use the equals method. We're usually checking to see if two objects have the same value. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that code to see that illustrated. I know that I've kind of annotated over it, so let me clear the screen here. So you can see that the last two lines here, when we evaluate the double equals, string object and literal are not pointing to the same object in memory, so you get false. But then if you're checking for equality, if they have the same value, they both have the value test, and so that is true. So the main thing to take away here is that if you're comparing two objects like strings, you want to use the equals method. You don't want to use the double equals, okay? That is the main thing to take out of this. All right, so I think that's the last example. So let's talk about the homework. Okay, so you've got, I think, 3 different homework problems. The first one is that you're basically going to create 3 Boolean variables, okay? Well, first you're going to ask the user to give 2 integers. So you're going to create a scanner object, so that should be your first step. Create a scanner object, and then you're going to ask for 2 integers. And then down here where it says compare the numbers, that's where you're going to have 3 Boolean variables. Okay, so if you look at the assignment here, you're going to in the first Boolean, you're going to compare the 2 numbers using the less than symbol. And then you're going to compare the 2 numbers using the equality symbol. And then you're going to compare the 2 numbers using the greater than symbol. So you're going to store the evaluation of each of those statements into Booleans, and then you're going to display the results. So you're going to print out the values of each of those Boolean variables. Okay, and then on the next homework, sugar tax, You're building a program for the American Heart Association that recommends that adults get no more than 36 grams of added sugar. Adult men, only 36 grams of added sugar, and then women, no more than 25 grams. So in this program, ask the user to enter the number of grams of added sugar they have eaten, and then you're going to use 30 grams as the cutoff point. So basically, you're going to ask the user for a number, and then if that number is greater than or equal to 30, you're going to say that they cannot have more sugar. You're going to say false. But if it's less than 30, then you're going to say that they can, that true, they can eat more sugar. Okay, so once again, you're going to use a scanner object for that, and then you're going to use the greater than or equal to operator. And then in the last homework, you are going to ask for 3 different numbers. You're going to ask for the number of points that you scored, how many rebounds you got, and how many assists that you have. Some sort of sports thing. I don't know, basketball. And then you're going to compare each of those. So you're gonna say, did you get 10 or more points? Did you get 10 or more rebounds? And then did you get 10 or more assists? And then you're gonna put the equivalent Boolean values there. Okay. So that's your homework. It's due at the end of the day Friday, so I'm expecting you to get started on it between now and Friday, and then Friday we'll go over any questions that you may have. Okay. I'll stick around for questions, but if you don't have any, you are free to go. Have a good day, and I will see you Friday because there's no school on Wednesday.